Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our colleagues joining from across Southeast Asia and around the globe. Once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the third and final installment of our webinar series, Enhancing Livelihoods and Creating Workforce Readiness for Clean Energy and Sustainable Transformation in Southeast Asia. So my name is Baderia Yosiana, and I am the Partnership Manager at the Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat. It is an absolute privilege to open today's session. I also would like to thank our partners, our speakers, and also Tara Climate Foundations for the good collaborations and make this webinar series possible. So our webinar today is titled Turning Policy into Practice, Building a Just Transitions Ecosystem in Southeast Asia. So over our past two webinars, we explored the regional energy outlook as well as dive deep into demand-driven data-backed reskilling. And today we focus heavily on the how, the practical steps required to build a coordinated ecosystem across communities, nations, regions, and sectors to ensure that clean energy transitions are truly people-centered, equitable, and inclusive. But before we dive into our content, here is today's agenda, and shortly I will provide a quick introductions to the work of CEM and our Empowering People initiative, and following that we will get a sneak peek review of our upcoming regional toolkit from my colleague Laura John Davinon, and then we will move into a deep dive panel discussions featuring an incredible lineup of regional and global discussants. And because today is all about turning policy into practice, we want to hear directly from you. So we will be conducting live audience polling and gathering your feedback throughout the hour. And please use the chat and Q&A functions to submit your questions to our speakers. But before that, let's do a polling. We want to know where are you from and which organization you're coming from. So please fill the polling in so we will know where you are based. We'll give maybe like another couple of seconds to let people answering where they are. Right, and then I think we got quite a lot of diverse group today. And I will do another polling on where you're coming from. So bear with me. Right, we also want to know what is the type of your organization. So I will also give another couple of seconds so that people could answer. Right, so we also have quite diverse. We have government, NGO, private sectors, international organizations. We also have educator. We have student and youth and other. Right, and yeah, you could still continue like introducing yourself and drop your LinkedIn profile on the chat so we could connect each other. Right. Okay, so as you drop your introductions into the chat, let me give you a brief introductions about CEM. For those who are not familiar with the Clean Energy Ministerial, so we are a high-level government-led platform. So we bring together a global community of the world's largest and most forward-looking economies, private sector champions, and the international experts to accelerate the clean energy transitions and collaborate on areas of shared interest. So we do have a global footprint. We have 29 member countries, including all the G20 members, who collectively represent over 80% of global clean energy investment and 90% of installed clean power capacity. And in addition, we have 26 participating countries actively engaging with us across a variety of critical energy topics. And each year, CEM hosts a high-level ministerial meeting in a different host country. And so this ministerial meeting brings together energy ministers and global leaders to take stock of progress, deploy clean energy solutions, set new priorities, and drive collective actions. And then, like, how do we actually turn these high-level discussions into real-world actions? So we do it through what we call action coalitions. So CEM currently hosts 24 active work streams spanning the entire energy ecosystem, from power and transport to industry, buildings, and people-centered transitions, and including the Empowering People initiative that brought all of us today. And these all work streams are voluntary and driven by a flexible bottom-up approach where member countries decide which initiatives to join to reach concrete and practical deliverables. And one of those vital action-oriented work streams is the one bringing us together today, the Empowering People Initiative, or EPI. And as you can see on the slide, the EPI is highly collaborative global platform. Our work is proudly co-led by the governments of Canada and the European Union, with a dedicated active participant from countries like Chile and Denmark. And at its heart, our objective is to really advance an inclusive, people-centered workforce development framework for the global clean energy transitions. And we bridge the gap between policy and action by helping countries align their workforce readiness directly with their energy policies. And we do this through practical toolkits, applied learning, and by creating collaborative spaces like today's webinar. And EPI's mandate targets three main focus areas. First is on skills development by identifying the concrete capabilities needed for tomorrow's energy landscape. Second, by policy planning and implementations. And the third is inclusive workforce development. And this is a massive effort. So we work alongside leading organizations like ILO, World Economic Forum, UNIDO, IEA, and IRENA, alongside with vital youth voices like Student Energy and SDG Youth Constituency. And these slides perfectly captures the core behind the specific webinar series, our powerful collaboration with the Tara Climate Foundations. So by combining Tara's effort, especially in Southeast Asia, and CEM's Empowering People initiative, we have built a joint framework designed to support a just and inclusive energy transition in Southeast Asia. So our efforts focus on three intersecting pillars. First, in workforce and skills. Second is in gender inclusivity, and also fostering sustainable lifestyles. And to achieve this, we operate across four key areas. First is on thought leadership. Second is by having a regional convening power, and we are very proud to have UNESCO here today with us. And we also work with GIZ, for example, and ASEAN Center for Energy to align with on-the-ground realities, as well as target ministries and national perspective. And so ultimately, this collaboration delivers three key benefits for Southeast Asia. First, by having visibility to showcase regional progress at major semi-ministerial, peer learning via global to regional dialogue, and practical support through tangible technical guidance, and manifested in a very toolkit we are previewing today. So this is my last slide. So this slides maps out the deliberate journey that has brought us today's sessions. So the webinar series has been a step-by-step process designed to build a comprehensive, highly relevant regional resources. So we kick our first webinar in December 2025, the second one on 2026. And then today we will have our third and final webinars, and my colleagues LJ will give you a brief report on what happened on the first and the second webinar. And yeah, I think today's session is more than just listening. It is about active knowledge and exchange and community strengthening. So throughout the hour, we will dive into new labor market analysis and tools, hear diverse national, regional, also global best practices from our ex-team discussions. And most importantly, we will also give you a preview of the toolkits. And I think we want the toolkit to be a living resources, a roadmap of scalable projects and policy approaches specifically tailored for the Southeast Asian context. So yeah, again, thank you so much for your time, your commitment, and your shared dedications to an inclusive clean energy future for Southeast Asia. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over the floor to my colleague, Laura Jean, or I call her LJ, who will take us through the presentations of the Toolkit framework. LJ, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yossi, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm just adjusting my screen so I can hear. As Yossi said, we are joining from all corners of the globe. I apologize about my strange appearance. It is the middle of the night here in New York. So I am, it is 0300 hours, so bear with me as I completely wake up here. Next slide, please, Yossi. So, thank you to CEM and Tara Foundation and all of you again for being here. It's been a journey that we've been on developing both this webinar series. We've learned a lot. We've had a lot of you join us for one or more of these events. I see some familiar names and faces, and we have some wonderful discussants for you. So very excited. If you did not join us, we would like to just give you a brief taste of some of the discussions that we have been having, especially since these discussions and also our bilateral and other group meetings with knowledge partners are what have actually shaped this toolkit into what it is becoming. We've really tried to have this be a listening process and understanding what is needed on the ground in Southeast Asia. As I said, I am not sitting there with you, unfortunately. I wish I were. But we have been very grateful for all the knowledge partners that have contributed, and just a few of these are on these slides. It has truly taken a village to develop this content. So you notice we do have some government participants today. That has been true throughout this. That is one of CEM's focus areas, is the energy ministers and their partners working in the different countries. So we had Mr. Prahora from Indonesia and Mr. Sinacruz from Philippines representing their respective governments. We also had our partners from ACE who will be featured prominently in the toolkit, given their role as regional conveners and providers of resources for all the ASEAN countries. We heard from our colleagues in Korea. We will also have some very important information in the toolkit from our partners at GIZ. We have heard from the Indonesian partners. We know they are active in other areas such as Vietnam and throughout Southeast Asia. So we'll certainly be including Christian and our colleagues and their perspectives in this toolkit. We mentioned the youth, very important. I know we have some of our partners from Youth for Energy today. And we know that one of the drivers of this toolkit are the amount of folks under 30 in the Southeast Asia region. We'll talk about that in just a little while. This is a critical stakeholder group that we need to engage in order to have a successful clean energy and technology transition. Next slide, please, Yossi. Then going back to 12 March, we had no surprise, our colleagues from the International Energy Agency, the wonderful Elspeth Hathaway, who some of you have been in the room with. There was recently a convening IEA supported an SEA. Certainly a lot of the market data and some of the projections that we are reliant on to understand where the clean energy market is going, both globally as well as in SEA. We are really we're very grateful to IEA as well as the other organizations who are working on things like labor market data. And we are going to cover in the toolkit how perspectives on how we want to leverage labor market data to inform green skilling and where we focus resources when it comes to workforce development and other efforts, and the support that we need to give to learners and workers to increase their green skills and their clean energy skills. And also, we will have some examples of how Indonesia and others are leveraging this data. We have more at our fingertips than ever before, thanks to the advent of things. I know we hear too much about AI, but it is helping us to better understand regional and even micro-regional job trends and labor market trends. And then finally, we did hear from one of our academic partners in Thailand about, again, some of the market drivers and some of the gaps that she perceives in the marketplace. And we're delighted to have some other perspectives from Thailand today. So I'm going to bring us to today. And as we went through the first couple webinars, again, we were listening very hard for some of the themes that were recurring, some of the things that seemed important to those working on the ground in SEA, and some of the gaps that they had identified. And so we tried to kind of crosswalk that with some of the work that CEM has done with our global partners, some of the best practices that we know are out there. There is work done both in SEA, but also globally. So today we're going to be hearing from folks on the ground in a number of countries, but we're also going to hear from the global partners, the ILOs, the IEAs, how have other sectors, how have other groups done this work so we can all learn from one another and follow these best practices examples, the standards, the things we know that work. So we're not all independently figuring this out. We can share information, we can share resources, and that is what this toolkit is all about. Some of the research questions that we really hope this toolkit, both with the recommendations for government and their partners, but also the examples that we provide. Again, what is the interaction of labor market data and workforce and upskilling? How does that inform where we're going with our skilling efforts, and where should government be investing funding and attention? We know that academia and TVETs are some of our closest colleagues in this effort. There are a number of cross-country collaborations going on. Those are the things that we want to point to in terms of best practices, not only to bring this new curriculum to students, but also how can we embed this curriculum in existing pathways? Clean energy does not stand alone. It should be integrated into every aspect of education, not only on the technology side, but in how we conduct our businesses. Folks that are making decisions about the technology that goes into buildings are not necessarily practitioners. So we need everyone with a consciousness of what it takes to operate in a decarbonized economy. Again, you'll sense a recurring theme here: workforce development, effective upskilling and reskilling efforts are all about partnerships. There is no one group, there is no one stakeholder category that can do this work alone. It's about building the ecosystems to make this work and to support learners, workers, youth, historically disadvantaged communities to access both the technology that we know we need to have healthier and more sustainable decarbonized communities, but also the jobs that come with these new paradigms. How can we work together to make that happen? And then, of course, everyone always wants to know about the training programs. We do also want to give some examples of not only effective training in alignment with employer needs and industry standards, but also how do we remove those barriers, again, for the populations that we know it's not only just to include them, but we need everyone at the table. When you're talking about systems change and paradigm shifts, again, not a single person effort. We need everyone at the table. We need women, youth, the informal workforce, traditional fuel workers. Well, huge coal region, no surprise. We'll talk about that. And again, our target audience are certainly the governments that we know are on with us here today, because they need to do things like set effective policies, but also all the universe of implementation partners, the NGOs and others who are on the phone today. And thank you so much for joining us. Next slide, please, Yossi. So how will this information be presented in the toolkit? I just kind of announced some lofty goals for this toolkit. The sections, and again, we are asking you, this is not set in stone. We are in draft format. The recommendations I'm about to share with you are drafts, and we do want your input, and we want to know what we have missed. We know that there are nuances and critical information that may have been overlooked, even though we did do an exhaustive literature review and did the rounds with our partners. We will have some key recommendations, again, actionable for the policymakers, but also their partners who need to implement the policies. That's the critical piece. We'll look at the why. Why is this toolkit needed? As we're all conscious on this meeting, there are certain trends, there are certain demographic developments that are really driving the critical need for these efforts and these policy frameworks. We are going to give examples in the toolkits. Again, if you cannot implement your policies, nothing happens. So we want to look at effective examples, excuse me, of people implementing these policies, again, both in SEA, but also globally. And then, of course, a toolkit isn't a toolkit without all the tools and resources. We want to share with you some of the best resources that we refer to in our literature review, some of the great labor market data that's out there, some of the trends and projections that you should be looking at if you are developing programming, and all sorts of reference materials, either for writing policies, implementing programs, developing training, developing recruitment programs, providing wraparound supports for disadvantaged communities. It will all be in there. All right, next slide. We hope again, we all know this, folks, but this is just an example. Thank you to Yossi for posting the EPI link in the chat. This is just a snapshot, again, of some of the trends in SEA and globally that are driving the need for this. Again, we know SEA is in some ways uniquely vulnerable to climate change, both in the geography as well as the demographics. Also, we know that a lot of the minerals that we need to run an effective storage or other technologies are extracted in these regions, and that's something we ought to consider when we're developing programming as well. We have amazing potential. It's not all barriers. We have so much untapped talent and so many amazing youth and others that we can engage in this way, but we need to get the message out there about these career pathways and the benefits to participating in a decarbonized economy. And also, we do want to leverage this for a just transition. This is a thread that will be woven throughout the toolkit from CEM's perspective and that of many, or if not all of the partners on this line. If we have a decarbonized economy, but it is not inclusive and just, and we do not increase the equity and health of communities that have been disproportionately disadvantaged through our dirty energy economy, we won't have attained our goals. Next slide, please. So this is kind of one of the punchlines, folks, and we will be reflecting back as we speak with the discussants and we hear from you. This is a very, very high level recommendations. Again, we will have these in action in the section. I see some input is already coming in via the chat. Thanks, Phil. We would like to hear from you throughout this, so please do drop questions in the chat and we will come back to them as we pause in between the sections here. So no surprise, this is a toolkit for policymakers, for governments and their partners. So it seems obvious, but we definitely need the framework, a holistic policy framework in the countries that are adopting decarbonized energy. And this is not just energy policy, and that is one of the areas in which we fall down frequently. We are very siloed in our policymaking. I'm saying we because every country has an aspect of this. We do see harbingers of change. We have seen examples in Indonesia, Philippines, and other countries of cross ministry collaborations, whether it be with the education ministry, the social enterprise folks, or others. We need the policy frameworks to reflect that. Ideally, we would have a suite of policies that stems from the goals, the specific clean energy goals of the country in question. I mentioned the recurring theme of partnerships. The ASEAN region has a very key strength, and that is this consciousness. And I know it's just growing in some sectors, but there are cross-border collaborations already on things like energy transmission and other efforts. We want to leverage those regional collaborations, those communication channels that already exist to push forward this agenda of green jobs, clean energy jobs, and the just transition. And again, reaching out through those existing partnership channels will be more effective in some cases than forming our own groups, although we certainly need that also. Which the next recommendation is about the coordinating entities that we need. So groups like CEM, groups like ACE, who reach across borders. We need these coordinating entities who are speaking to multiple stakeholders and working to develop effective workforce ecosystems. And we'll talk more about what that means. I already mentioned labor market data. We ought to be aligning our workforce and skills data with our climate and equity goals. And of course, employer and private sector demand. We will hear from folks representing industry during this discussion, and which is critical for the data we need upon which to base job skills training. And we want to be very clear again, in addition to needing everyone at the table to make this work, we want this to be a just transition. We need to attract more workers and more diverse workers. We know that the SEA region is lagging behind the global average in terms of women participating in the energy sector, for instance. This is true also, unfortunately, in clean energy. So we are going to be hearing from CEM's gender initiative about some of those issues. We will again have industry represented here. We know that we need to be engaging employers. And again, I know these all seem to be logical conclusions as you work, but we do not see enough industry and training provider collaborations. This is globally. We have historically a lot of difficulty getting from the training to the hiring processes, right? This is an area in which workforce development frequently falls down, and that is because we do not have the communication streams that we need between industry and the training and education sector. And then finally, we cannot belabor this point enough. This needs to be a just transition. And in addition to the fact we want to be inclusive, we also know that we are losing jobs in a certain sense as we are gaining clean energy, but it should not be a lose-win dialogue. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. So that was quite a mouthful. I will pause there for the next slide. We are going to be going into some examples, and thank you again for the suggestions. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. But we were really presenting that because that is what we want you to react to, as well as kind of the format of the toolkit. So here's an example I mentioned. So when we're talking about labor market data and skills data and how we want that to align with clean energy goals. So historically, this has been a challenge. We didn't always know what we were planning for. We've had some fits and starts in the clean energy sector because there was a misalignment between where the market was going and the education and training we were providing. We are able to keep a pace of this data a little more effectively now. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. But we do have some new tools that Indonesia and the Philippines and others are leveraging. So we mentioned this collaboration between Indonesia's energy ministry and GIZ and other partners. They've been doing things like occupational mapping, assessment of the current workforce, so a gap analysis. They are, again, aligning their policies with the clean energy future that they would like to see. And I mentioned that cross-ministry collaboration that's so critical. We'll talk more about that later. Next slide, please, Yossi. So again, this is just a taste of the examples. Some of the examples will come from our discussions today. So you'll see that some of these are not as specific as others. Again, what are we talking about when we're talking about a workforce ecosystem? It's very small there, but we have a little graphic of all the entities that government needs to engage or that need to be engaged with government. It's a two-way dialogue. So the employers, the training providers, the community groups that are on the ground with learners and workers supporting them and providing wraparound services, the labor organizations, these all need to be connected and, in a sense, pulling in the same direction to have these workforce initiatives work and to support learners and workers. Some of the recommendations that we'll be talking about in the toolkit are how we can engage employers. We'll hear an example from India and others today. We want to talk a little more deeply with ACE. We've been in touch with them throughout this process, but we want to hear specifically from them their recommendations for how we can leverage their role to move this forward. It's a critical task for them, and we know that they have a lot to share with us about where they see things going. And then finally, we know that SEA basically leads the world in the proportion of youth you have sitting there ready to take part in a decarbonized economy. We want more of those youth to have jobs. We want more of those youth to have quality jobs that are family and sustaining jobs. And so we need to be partnering with them and listening to them as we move forward, especially about how they communicate, because it might not be the same way we do. Next slide, please. And then finally, I think you'll get to hear from some other voices shortly here. We know that coal and other fossil fuels have been a critical source of energy for SEA as the Southeast Asian area grows. The area is astronomically growing. We know population growth is one of the drivers for this discussion. We also know that some of the technologies we're implementing are using more energy. We were actually decreasing energy use in certain countries through energy efficiency goals recently. That is shifting due to the advent of AI and other energy intensive activities. So we're really going to take a look, but this does not have to be an either or a winners and losers paradigm. A lot of the discussions that are happening about this transition, not by mistake, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of stake in the fossil fuel industry. A lot of this is a win-lose discussion on, okay, we're going to lose these jobs if we're implementing clean energy. It does not have to be that way. We know that China and others are implementing their just transition policies in a way that is inclusive of the fossil fuel industry, with respect to ensuring that the regions that are impacted by the clean energy transition have either engagement with clean energy, tourism, agriculture, another economic driver that can support them going forward. And next slide, Yossi. I believe that we're about to transition here. And yes, we have a ton of reference materials for you. This is just a sample, some of which are from folks that are on the phone today. We will have some more examples to add after today. If you have examples from your country or your group that you would like to share, please do drop them in the chat. We will also give you a means to submit those online after this event. If you're like me and it's either a weird time of day or you need to go do something else after this webinar, you have a means to communicate with us. Please reach out directly anytime. I will drop my email. We will have the CEM information in the chat, but we also have a Google form for you to complete. Boy, that was a mouthful. I bet folks have questions. We're going to go to the next slide and the next session of our presentation. We have some wonderful voices on the line. We are just so fortunate to have experts from every corner of SEA and indeed the globe joining us today. I am going to give brief introductions of each of these panelists, but they will more completely introduce their work. And they will also be reacting to the toolkit. And each of them were chosen strategically for the either the sector or the type of organization they were working with. So they will each have a unique perspective. But we did ask them to look at this through the lens of the toolkit and some of the research questions that we are asking. So we will be leaving those on the screen. We would like you also to consider those, our attendees, as our panelists are speaking. We are glad to have you drop questions for myself or any of the discussants in the chat as we go. If we accumulate too many, we will go back to those. But now I will turn over the floor to our first discussant, coming to us from Indonesia, speaking about the hydrogen sector. This is a really exciting developing area of technology, one which I have a lot to learn. So I'm going to pass the floor to Chipu and have him speak about his organization's work. Thank you so much, Chipu.
Yes, thank you very much, LG, for the time. Hi, everyone. If I may ask how many minutes that I have, so
3 to 4. Don't use it all in one place.
Okay, I will not go beyond that. So thank you very much. Let me introduce myself. My name is Chipu. I'm the business developer of HDF Energy. It's a hydrogen to power project developer. So our solution is actually we are developing a project where we are combining solar PV, battery, and hydrogen, and then we use the hydrogen as a long-term storage. And then, yes, it is very good opportunity for us to speak in this event. And then I will tackle the first question from you. How can current recommendation be refined for us? I think the toolkits has been quite complete, but we need to move beyond what should be done to how to do it. So for us, from a project developer perspective, what we need is that has there been any skill mapping for emerging technologies like hydrogen, storage, integrated system? And then we know that in Indonesia, there have been a SWIFT project where the Ministry of Energy has mapped this one, and then HDF was happily participating in this event. And then perhaps for us, we need to see the example of industry and TVET partnership. And then is there any internship or apprenticeship models that can be used as a reference for the project developer to include youth participations in their project? And then related to what is needed for hydrogen economy in Southeast Asia. So I think talking about emerging technologies like hydrogen, we should not see hydrogen as a I mean, you don't need to train people really from zero. It should not be viewed as a building an entirely new workforce, because for us in HDF, our solutions is combining solar PV based on hydrogen to deliver a baseload power in the island grid or in the remote grid. Means that people who already have renewable experience can learn how hydrogen and storage complement renewable solutions. So this is to tackle the intermittency coming from the intermittent PV, intermittent power like solar PV or wind power. And then also people who has experience in gas sector already have existing capabilities to talk about hydrogen, because they understand how the pipelines look like, what's the compression system, industrial processes, and also safety management. So what we need is only targeted reskilling for the people who have been exposed to gas sector, for instance, if they want to shift to hydrogen solutions. Then what kind of engagement that we think important for building this workforce ecosystem for energy transition in Southeast Asia? Perhaps from HDF perspective, we're still a small team in Indonesia and then also in Southeast Asia. What we are doing at the moment is that we open internship opportunities for students and young professionals. Recently, we opened an internship opportunity for students, and then at the moment we receive 160 participants, and then they're coming from naval architecture, ocean engineering backgrounds, applying for one particular position, and then it has been very competitive to get one opportunity in our office. So imagine, like, there are actually a lot of people, a lot of talented or skillful youth that can be empowered, but perhaps they don't have a channel on where can they start implementing their knowledge that they get from university. So what we think here is that there should be a sort of linkage between the industry and also the those who are in the final years of their studies who want to complement their study and then have industrial experiences. There should be a platform to link between the industry who needs like a fresh young professionals, and then also the university or the training centers that might have the capacity that the industry needs. And then the last one, talking about inclusivity. So since our establishment in 2021 in Indonesia, we understand that GETC and inclusivity are two important things. We don't think it as just a social addition, but we think it as a virtual infrastructure within energy transition itself. So in our first year, we were assisted by UK FCDO Mentari project. It's like a development project in Indonesia where they have GETC training. So they help us to start building our understanding on what is gender perspective in the project development, and then how can we put a gender lens in every aspect of the project. So just to give you an example, in our recruitment, because our targeted project is in eastern part of Indonesia, this is the area that is least developed, and then when we open our application for a business developer in eastern part of Indonesia, only less than 15% women applied. And then if we shortlist just based on the CV, perhaps none of the women will qualify. But we put a threshold of 30% in each of the stages of the interview. So then we could finally, out of 2 locations, we managed to have one lady assigned in one particular province. So that's how we put a gender perspective since the very early process and then also in terms of pre-project development, because now we're doing our studies, we're doing everything, and then we're doing our land acquisition process. We are trying to do it we are trying to incorporate inclusivity since the very first stage of the project. So we did our GETC study. We also do our free, prior, and informed consent when we know that, especially in the patriarchal in the eastern part of Indonesia, patriarchal cultures are still very strong. So there we try to gain the input from the women. If the project happens, what do you want to see? What kind of assistance that we need that you need from us? This will help us to develop our GETC work plan once the project is happening. So I think for me, the toolkit is one thing that we could revert to, but perhaps we need to have something more practical to make the toolkit more relatable, especially for us, the project developer. I end my line there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chipu. That was such a perfect cue up for our discussions. I really appreciate the caution to make sure that this is actionable. We certainly hope that it is. And, there's really the rubber meets the road with the projects, right? It's nice for us to sit around and talk about all the justice and all the stuff we want. But if there aren't people on the ground making money with this, the market's not gonna work. I also really appreciated the comments around the role that the employers play in a just transition. We could support someone, for example, you use the example of women and how they're underrepresented. We can usher them through the recruitment, training, and education, all that. But if they hit the workplace and they can't be hired, or they're not supported, or there aren't labor practices in place that support holistic humans, we are not going to be able to retain women and other workers in this sector. So speaking of supporting workers, we're going to switch to our next discussant. so we're going from Indonesia to Vietnam. We're going to jump around here. We have the wonderful Huang Tran from the Vietnam Sustainability Social Enterprise on the line with us today. I'm going to pass the floor to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is very, very interesting topic today because I think it's very important for example, Vietnam. And just want to say hello to everyone first. And I'm the founder of VSSE, and we are social enterprise with over 10 years in the energy transition. We would love to bring all stakeholders come together to bring the just and inclusive energy transition for Vietnam. And that's the reason we supporting a lot of different communities, different groups in energy sector to bring the best of our workforce and also resources to use in a very sustainable way. So to give some feedback to the toolkit, I have to say that firstly, I'm very impressive because we do the capacity building for the local communities every single day. And what we see is very important when we can see the level of the reason of the ASEAN here and the workforce. So with the question number one, general feedback on the toolkit, one thing to the all 7 key factors, what you bring here is really important when we see. And the one thing I would love to add on that the innovation element. Why? Because right now we facing a lot of shifting in the world with the AI, with the the certain of happening now with the energy topic become everywhere in single family now happening. Everybody aware of what we're facing when we have to face with like the war happening and the gas and because of the time I could not go very detailed, but I want to push the innovation. It could be narrow down the gap because we need energy, but we have to make it fast. We can't wait. Yeah, the company need the employees immediately for the project. Yeah, we need that. And to fulfill that gap with the speed, it have to be innovation. And now with the digitalization, it could be the opportunity, for example. So that's the one highlight. And of course, in ASEAN, that is very interesting. We have 60% of the population in the workforce. And with such amount of potential, really how we can make a peer-to-peer exchange between those countries to make sure that, for example, Singapore, they have different ways of the focus on transition. Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and so on. We have different kind of like a level to focus, and why not? We can take the advantage of the strength from each other and create the very good platform for workforce, even to work. For example, when I qualify in Vietnam, I still can work in Singapore in some kind of way. So it's very important for me to see, the peer-to-peer. We use all of the advantages of the each countries. I think it can bring a lot of benefit for the market. And the last thing is about the culture by itself, because you know that with the language, so diversity and the cultural background in ASEAN to come together is also is very good that we have ASEAN Foundation. We also have a lot of activity together. But to talking about energy transition, how we can make sure that the regional labor mechanism can happen, we need the government hand in hands. Yeah. So because of the time, so I think maybe I could not go very much in the detail, but for sure we're supporting right now, for example, women in energy sector. I was in Manila and I shared our study when we interview with so many women network in the world and also in different regional, and we see that the motivation to change to level up their job and their career development. And when I was in Manila in Philippines, and I saw that yes, we have some very good pattern, and we also have different culture. So how it can influence into that, I think it's kind of make us very signature in somehow when we take care about the workforce ecosystem here. So for me, in general, the framework, the toolkit is very good with the 7 key recommendation here. I just want to add on some kind of very sub approach somehow with the significant from the ASEAN, the culture, the motivation, the mechanism to make it everybody can work and contribute in the regional level, not only on a single country, for example. So I just want to make it sums up like that. And of course, I'm looking forward to the others. From our side, as a VSSE, we're very looking forward to see the whole toolkit that we can think better and act better on our initiative in the action in the local level. Yeah. So looking forward for the further discussion.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your comments. Certainly the speed of innovation and our need to quickly scale these skills and jobs is one of the drivers here. So thank you for reminding us. And I hear you about the need for the portability of these jobs. So again, how can we make these not specific just to one region? I think that speaks to the need for things like standardization. Yes, there are cultural and other environmental differences across the country borders, but there's certain things that don't change about how this technology operates. So we need to base things on standards while still recognizing the regional, cultural, and other differences. So thank you for those comments. We're going to go next to our colleagues in India who have had, they have a very amazing kind of central coordination body, the Green Skills Council that CEM has been working with. So that's a good example of one of these kind of coordinating entities that are needed to accelerate skills development. We have Reena Suri, the Executive Director of the India Smart Grid Forum, on with us. We're so fortunate to have you here today. I will pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Ray, and thank you for having me here. Very good afternoon to everyone. And, I think at the outset, let me congratulate the team for developing this toolkit. It is, both timely and very practical. I've gone through it in detail. And as the toolkit, rightly highlights, the Southeast Asia is simultaneously facing, the climate pressures as well as rising energy demands. And in fact, yesterday only we saw in India the highest demand ever. Right? So it was a record-breaking day for us. And we were able to manage with the supply that we have, which is commendable for our energy practitioners here. So at the same time, we see that there is a rapid economic transformation that we are looking at with the rising demand, energy demand, and so on and so forth. So, in the region, which has a tremendous potential of workforce potential, and with so much of new transition and transformation that we are looking at, with renewable energy expected to generate millions of new jobs in the coming decades. And as an entity, India Smart Grid Forum, we are a private, a public-private partnership entity, a think tank focused on smart grid digitalization, energy storage, mobility, clean energy transitions, and we work very closely with the variety of various stakeholders who are involved in this transition work, utilities, regulators, industry, academia, and international partners on policy, innovation, and capacity building. And the work with our partners, we very closely work on knowledge sharing, utility training, which is also, one of the key aspects we very, focus on is knowledge sharing. And not only in what are the practices, but what kind of policy advisory support required, training, exchange, best practices, etc. So from our perspective, this conversation is very important, and the energy transition is no longer only about clean energy deployment. It is all about people skilling and institutional readiness. And across the region, the power systems are becoming very, digital, decentralized, and intelligent. And we are seeing rapid deployment of smart grids, RE, storage. Sipu talked about hydrogen. That is also one area which India is also looking forward to, and nuclear. So that we have less dependency on fossil fuels. So we are experimenting with multiple new generation technologies, as well as storage is one of the key things, and AI-enabled grid management is the future that we are looking at. But technology alone cannot deliver the transition, and we need a future-ready workforce capable of planning, operating, regulating, maintaining these evolving energy systems. And one of the strongest aspects of this toolkit, which I've seen, is it emphasizes, on workforce ecosystem and cross-sectoral collaboration. And I would particularly reinforce the recommendation on data alignment, using labor market intelligence, workforce analytics to guide the workforce, the skill development agencies, and energy technologies, which are evolving very quickly. Training systems often struggle to, keep pace with that kind of evolution that we are looking at. So therefore, the governments and institutions need dynamic mechanisms to continuously map the emerging jobs and roles. And for example, we now need skills not only in solar RE, but also battery and EV and DER, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. So coming back to my suggestions on few suggestions that I may further strengthen, would request can strengthen the toolkit further, is to first, we can look at ASEAN countries which could work towards developing the regional energy skills framework and harmonize certification pathways. This would support the workforce mobility, regional collaboration, and standardization of competencies across the emerging sectors such as smart grid, storage, and digital energy technologies. Also, secondly, the toolkit could place even greater emphasis on industry-led TVET and academic partnerships, existing engineering and vocational programs with the should integrate clean energy and digital energy modules with active participation from utilities and technology companies. In India, I think in the slide 4, I would also request that in terms of the stakeholders, if utilities and the power companies can also be included, which actually play a key role in the decision making in this regard. So they should also be included. And of course, industry can support the curriculum design and internships and apprenticeship and faculty development and practical exposure for the sector. A third point I would like to bring in is that I believe that the toolkit should further strengthen the focus on digital energy skills. The clean energy transition is also digital transition, and for the future workforce readiness will increasingly depend on capabilities in AI, data analytics, automation, cybersecurity, and intelligent energy management systems. And finally, I would also encourage a stronger focus on inclusive entrepreneurship and local workforce development. Women, youth, and underserved communities should not only participate in the transition as workers, but also as entrepreneurs and innovators, particularly in the areas such as the rooftops, solar services, EV charging operations, energy audits, or distributed energy management and community energy solutions are some of the key areas we can push this agenda. And lastly, I think another very important point highlighted is the concept of just transition. and the clean energy transition, which cannot be viewed as a winner or loser, but communities dependent on fossil fuel-based industry need clear transition pathways, reskilling opportunities, and economic support and mechanism. So this human dimension is critical for ensuring long-term social acceptance and sustainability of the transition. I think that's all from my side, and I believe ASEAN is a unique opportunity to become a global example of people-centered energy transition, and with a strong regional cooperation, growing clean energy investments, and the young workforce, the region can build not only resilient energy systems but also inclusive and future-ready economies. And thank you once again, and I look forward to the discussion.
Oh, thank you, Rena. You had me writing quickly there for a while. Such great comments, so relevant. Thank you. I love your bold call for the regional framework. I think we were frightened to take it quite that far, but let's do it. We need a regional framework, especially going back to the comments about portability across borders. So a lot to digest here, but we want to make sure that we give all our discussants an opportunity to chime in. But I do want to make sure that we go back to Rena and Chipu after this event. We're not able to hear everything we want to hear, and I would love some specific strategies that you have seen work with the employer and academic, employer, public partnerships with the governments, so we can give some very concrete examples. So moving on to our next discussant, we have the wonderful Tarina Fernando from the World Economic Forum, who are very active in the SEA region. As we've all been commenting, this is a very, we have a lot of opportunity in this region to show other areas how this could be done. Certainly cross-country partnerships will help with that. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Tarini to share WEF's work and your perspectives on the toolkit. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Georgienne, and thank you so much, Yossi, for all the work that you've put into this meeting and, of course, the series so far. It's great to be here with everybody. So yes, I sit with the World Economic Forum, and just very briefly, we're, of course, an international organization that is really about bringing the public and the private sector together and acting as that coordinating platform, and especially sort of at the highest levels, right? Trying to make sure that we are bringing in ministers and CEOs to really shape and also drive forward a particular agenda, setting a very strategic national context, and then working also from the bottom up. And so with the work that we do, one of the very concrete ways in which we move from sort of global dialogue and convening, which may be what you're familiar with the forum doing, country accelerators are a way in which we actually make all of that discussion and dialogue very context specific, and actually look at what is happening within countries to see where can we mobilize an ecosystem, and how can the forum essentially serve as an additive role, convening, supporting the coordination, and actually then trying to move forward from dialogue to action in a very context specific way. So in Indonesia, we have a jobs and skills accelerator. And as all of our accelerators, they are really about identifying and enabling locally driven initiatives. So the premise for our work is actually working in collaboration with the Ministry of Manpower and Bappenas, the Planning and Development Ministry, as well as a number of different private sector CEOs who have come on board to lend their support and championship for this effort, including also business associations, Kadin and Apindo. Those in Indonesia will be familiar with the role that they play. And for us, the premise was recognizing that last year in Indonesia, they launched the Green Workforce Development Roadmap. So really setting the high level context. Christian was here in past webinars, and really the part of work that GIZ is doing on it, recognizing what a central role, in the toolkit, it talks about that strategic policy, holistic vision for where do you want to go with this. And that is an important signal also for the private sector to recognize where's the momentum? Where are the incentives coming? Where might the regulations be going? And so for us, really the goal is to support and mobilize an ecosystem around it. And so we have really three objectives, which is one of which is about, building a robust talent pipeline for green growth. Secondly is ensuring that the green transition is actually correcting for some of the existing labor market divide. So we've talked a lot about it here in terms of gender and also disability inclusion being one of the key areas of focus for us in the accelerator. And then the third is recognizing and addressing proactively some of the social risks that the transition can generate. So just very quickly in terms of where we are and what we're doing, as with our accelerators, we really start with a very comprehensive systems analysis, trying to understand and pull together a lot of the local ecosystem data on jobs, skills, the policy context. We complement that with more external sort of global literature reviews as well as consultations. We then go through the process of actually trying to understand and map out what are companies especially doing in the current context, what are some of the most important public sector initiatives, but equally, what are private sector partners, firms doing to address and drive forward this transition? And so we're looking at very specific things like how are they actually playing a role in developing the workforce? I think Chipu talked about this, right? What are the internships? What is the job? How are they training and equipping the future workers? How are they communicating about their strategic hiring imperatives? And we're trying to understand what's already happening. And the goal of the accelerator is then to really scale up what's already working and create more visibility for the very practical strategies that work. So we go through this process of really trying to understand what are the main issues. I think in the Indonesian context, what we've found, and this really refers back to your workforce ecosystem discussion, it is very similar, right? In many country contexts, it's about the industry-aligned training, asymmetric information being one of the biggest barriers in terms of workers expressing an interest in wanting, or future workers, young people expressing an interest in wanting to participate in green jobs, but not really understanding what that career means. Like, what is the progression? What is the pathway? Where does this really go? And so there's a bit of a disconnect. And again, the private sector has a very important role to play there because they are hiring. They are the ones who are kind of at the forefront of also creating some of these new jobs. So we're looking at very concrete strategies to bridge that. Uneven access to reskilling and upskilling. So I think this speaks to some of the geographic dislocation that the transition brings forth. In the Indonesian context, we also see that a lot of the new green jobs are disproportionately held by younger workers. And so how do you support and ensure that older workers in the ecosystem are proactively also supported in transitioning to emerging roles or to different roles across the economy? And so we identify and sort of look at what are sort of the main barriers, and then globally look at and draw together best practices. So to give you an example, when it comes to industry-aligned training, mechanisms for collaboration, we know the role that sector skills councils can play. We know the role that work-based learning plays. We know we've heard a lot in the Indonesian context about the importance of also trainer upgrading. So the TVET has a really important role to play, but how do you make sure that trainers as well as the infrastructure surrounding TVET is really world-class? And sort of the machinery, even in those institutions, is reflective of what somebody will see in the workplace when it comes to that intersection of green and digital. So a number of different practices that we look across countries that we work with, we look across the literature to think about, given a set of key issues in the labor market, what are the best in class strategies to respond? And right now with the accelerator, what we're trying to do is actually do this in a more systematic way. We are right now running a survey and the goal of it is really to target the private sector. We've got an enormous piece of public sector legislation and a roadmap around the green transition. And what we're trying to do is very concretely understand the perceived business case. Does the private sector, and how does this vary depending on the sector that you're in and as well as your size? What is their perceived, how do they perceive the business case? Is there adequate policy clarity? Are there adequate incentives? What role then from thereafter do they see themselves playing, right? What are they already doing to create these internships? What are they doing to actually already go out and take part in job fairs to communicate where their hiring aspirations might be to essentially bridge that gap between worker and employer sort of knowledge? And and also like the social inclusion component is very much embedded in that. So one of our big areas of focus, for example, is skills first hiring, recognizing that people might not have the formal qualifications yet. And especially if we think about the informal economy, one of the most important ways is to actually recognize that they have a role to play. And how do you bring them in? Skills first hiring practices very practically can play a role. So we are also surveying companies and trying to get a sense of to what extent are formal qualifications incredibly important to them in hiring? To what extent are they open to hiring if you can demonstrate a set of skills? And if that's the case, underneath that, we have some really good examples of how to actually then do that in practice. So what we're trying to do is to have a much more evidence-based view of perceptions of the business case, as well as internal, firm level enablers that could be strengthened, as well as external enablers that could be strengthened for the private sector to take more of a practical role in some of these strategies that we see as effective in terms of responding to green skills development. So really more on that soon. The survey is out, and I think that's really where a lot more of the granular, here's the how, but that's the goal of the accelerator, is to really then move into an action plan and mobilize more support from the private sector to essentially work in collaboration with the public sector. We talk to them about how do you expect to engage on curriculum when it comes to informing TVET and so forth. So more on that, but that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. And I think maybe just very concretely then in response to the toolkit, I think what we're finding is everybody recognizes the need for coordination and that ecosystem level work. I think what the survey is trying to get at is the sequencing. What needs to go first? And how, if you were pushed to rank between the impact of different enablers, where do you focus? And I think, for example, there is a perception that having a very robust taxonomy is an essential starting point. But in many cases, companies will go and get the talent if they have a lot of, they're willing to build the talent if they see the business case in many cases. This, of course, varies depending on the company size. And so what we want to do is to put a bit of data behind and actually test some of these perceptions as to what is the most important first enabler. What can you do irrespective of some of the uncertainty in the wider ecosystem as well? And so I think it really is about sort of sequencing and then having very concrete strategic alliances that are issue specific. So it's not that everybody needs to coordinate on everything, but you have to have a few key partners really championing and mobilizing on a very specific things. And then I suppose on the final one, on the just transition, I think what we've heard and what we see in practice is actually going beyond the narrative of, the green jobs can be an opportunity for people transitioning out of fossil fuel industries. Yes, but in many cases, it's not a one for one, right? In most cases, it's not the case that you go from brown to green. And so because of the geography and because it takes a lot to actually shift livelihoods, so there is a wider conversation around what are other economic opportunities in a specific community and how do you actually support and validate that? And also what are the other intermediary like social protection systems, et cetera, that need to be there in complement, because you can't take for granted this nice to have of always, brown to green.
Thank you, Tarini. So much to react to there. I have a lot of comments, but I want to make sure we're reserving time for our remaining speakers and some Q&A, because we do have some other folks in the audience who have input, and I certainly hope that we can point to the accelerator and perhaps the outcomes of your survey in the toolkit and a minimum as reference material. So we're going to move quickly to our next speaker. I just want to remind the speakers that time is limited, and I wish we could have a whole webinar dedicated to each person's work. I'll find the funding, you come, okay? So we're returning to Michael Williamson with UN's SCAP program, obviously a key player in the region. Our hats are off for all the great work that you do, but I'm here to talk specifically about things through the lens of the toolkit and green skilling and the just transition. I'm passing it to you, Michael. Thank you so much for joining.
All right, thank you indeed, Lorjan, and thank you to Ibu Yossi and all of the colleagues in CEM for this opportunity. It's a great honor to join and join forces with you. Every time I work with CEM, I find that I'm learning lots of new and interesting things, and this is no exception. So, turning to the topic of jobs and energy transition, if we look very broadly, globally, 2% of jobs are occupied by the energy sector. So, energy sector is driving 2% of jobs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in aggregate numbers, it's a lot of people. And if we look at the split between the clean energy jobs and the fossil fuel jobs, a couple of years ago, we passed the tipping point where more than half of the jobs globally are generated by the clean energy sector. And indeed, as the energy transition progresses, we see that, this definition of what is an energy job is kind of expanding. The old idea of somebody shoveling coal into a boiler or something in a power station is now replaced by people who might work in rooftop solar, people installing heat pumps, people writing software for energy applications, and even people manufacturing EVs. So the energy transition implies kind of a decentralization and a much broader level of employment creation. So typically in the past, we've seen energy transition as something that we look at through a climate lens or maybe an economic lens, but it's really now a driver of enhanced social welfare. So whether we're talking about access to modern energy changing people's lives and livelihoods, whether we're talking about decarbonization is actually creating a safer climate future. But, as we replace fossil fuels with renewables, and this process is accelerating every year, we're actually creating more jobs. So if you look at each $1 million invested in clean energy compared to fossil fuels, you're generating more employment with every dollar of investment on the clean side of the equation. But I think, as other speakers have pointed to, every transition has got unintended consequences, and governments have to manage those consequences. So Tarini made the very good point about the going from the brown to green. So we're looking at geographic mismatches, but also skills mismatches. So those sides don't always match up. And to fix that conundrum, it really needs governments to have careful policy, attention, and adjustment programs. So as we talk about this, a bright, dazzling future of clean energy, which is job rich, that might be very appealing, but the reality is there are many complexities and pitfalls. So what countries want to do is to figure out how to localize these jobs rather than create them offshore. So when we think about the energy transition, we're moving from the mass use of coal, oil, and gas, which are natural resources we extract, moving more towards an equipment-based system. So we're using equipment, we're manufacturing equipment, we're selling it, we're installing it, we're using software, we're using grids. So that is a more labor intensive and possibly requires a more sophisticated and higher level of skill. So we also need to ensure that, as well as localizing these jobs in each country, which if you talk to the governments, they will be very focused on, not, for example, how can we create jobs in another country such as China? How can we create them here for the people that need them the most? But how do we ensure that that work is decent? And in order to do that, what is the skills development ecosystem that balances the supply and demand? So what is industry requiring? How do we meet that demand with our ecosystem of skills, education, and training? And so I talked also about how we mitigate the job losses from traditional sectors such as coal. Those skills might not be immediately transferable. So if we're going to talk about replacing those jobs, we have to accept it'll be a mixture of early retirements, it'll be people reskilling, moving into different roles, and maybe even different locations. So when we talk about regional policy alignment, it's clear from what all of the speakers have said today is that the absence or the lack of clean energy skills can be a constraint both to the pace of the energy transition and the scale of it. So we might have the technology down pat, we might have the finance all sorted out, but what about the people? So that's where we need the curricula, the training, the certification, and that needs to be backed by workforce planning, the financing of all of this, plus the lifelong learning system. So it's not just the technical colleges, the schools, but it's throughout the person's career. How do we make sure that these skills are updated? So all of the changes that we're talking about, we're actually seeing a number of waves coming at us over the horizon. We're talking about the energy transition, but also what about workforce digital skills? There's a need for more digital skills. and then the disruption caused by AI. So I kind of feel that these three waves are coming at once. And this creates a lot of complexity for governments because there's both positive and negative impacts of all of these aspects. So from our point of view as ESCAP, we can support countries to meet these challenges by including them into our regional, technical, analytical, and intergovernmental work. And so fortunately, we have two work areas within ESCAP. We have the Energy Division, we have the Social Development Division. We're increasingly talking to each other on this topic. And in support of CEM's Equality and Energy Transition Initiative last year, we worked together with CEM on an analytical piece. We did a report together, and we presented that at the CEM Ministerial. So this is, it really requires this kind of joined up work across different disciplines. But it's important to not forget that labor standards and skill certification are key measures. So we feel that global platforms like CEM or regional platforms like ESCAP, we can facilitate dialogue and knowledge exchange to strengthen the capacity of countries to align their transition strategies with labor market policies. And that includes things like labor mobility across countries. We also have existing regional frameworks, such as ESCAP's action plan to strengthen regional cooperation on social protection that are relevant to these efforts. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we have launched an initiative called the Energy Transition for Green Growth and Prosperity. This was launched just earlier this year, and that's a 3-year initiative that hopes to support member states to bring together the energy transition with green growth and industrial development. So we have a 3-pillared approach to support countries in Southeast Asia. It'll be through analytical work, developing green power corridors, and lastly, green finance. So in the process of consulting with countries on this, we've uncovered a lot of interest in addressing clean energy skills. And this is an area that could benefit from better data, as other speakers have spoken about, analytical frameworks, and joined up action across governments. So next month, we'll hold an inception workshop in Indonesia to gain insights and feedback from stakeholders on this very important skills development dimension. So in this process, we're very keen to work with you at CEM to help synergize our efforts. And once again, I hope I haven't been too quick in my intervention, but I wanted to make sure that I finished on time. So back to you, Laure-Jeanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And yeah, I'm sorry that we cannot give folks more time, but I am determined that our equality initiative does not get short shrift. So we're going to make sure we leave room for Azada. We're going to go to Carolina with ILO, who again have a hugely relevant body of work. We are only going to allow Carolina to speak for a couple minutes. I will pass the floor to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join this session today. I'd like to start by congratulating the team for this excellent work and much needed toolkit. I'm really glad to see the reflection of the world of work at the center of this energy transition and all the aspects related to collaboration and governance. I think these are key aspects that we can see in this toolkit that are extremely important in the energy transition. I will not repeat what a lot of the previous speakers just shared with us. So perhaps I will focus on a few points that I would like to stress and build upon that I think can be useful for this toolkit. But let me start with a quick ideas about what just transition means for the ILO. So from our perspective, a just transition includes the full range of policies and measures that are needed to support this transition process. This includes the skills development, but also other areas such as social protection, labor market policies, and social dialogue. Social dialogue is in fact one of the key areas that we include in our work in supporting energy transition. As you know, the ILO is the only tripartite organization in the UN system. So it means that in our governing body, we have governments, but also representatives of workers and employers deciding on the future of the world of work. And this is essential to consider when we start thinking about any impacts that we have in the world of work. And our objective, I'm sitting in the Priority Action Program on Just Transition in the ILO. As you know, also the ILO is a standard setting organization. So in addition to promoting labor standards, us sitting in the Just Transition Program, our objective is really to ensure that workers, but also enterprises and the communities, they can benefit from the opportunities of the transition, while at the same time addressing the risks. Now, we know that there will be risks, there will be challenges in this transition, and do all this in a manner that is fair and inclusive, that leaves no one behind. And of course, skills development is really a cornerstone of the just energy transition. I think in Southeast Asia, many of the ILO's action is really related to labor market readiness, and is strongly linked to the green skills development. You mentioned already in your presentation, there is one of the publications from the ILO that is already used as a reference. So we have this element of building research, building knowledge, but we also work a lot on hands-on practical support to countries. So also a significant part of our work is focusing on skills forecasting, developing skills taxonomies, and anticipating future skills needs. And I think other participants, speakers also touched upon this point. And we also work in supporting labor market information systems that is essential to build the diagnostics to understand what's going on at this moment in the labor market, so that we can also forecast what is coming in the future. Another element that I think is important is our work with active labor market policies, to build these policies together with government and also with public employment services. And I think this I didn't hear much today. Public employment services, they can also play a key role in connecting workers' needs with the demand that is coming from employers. And they can facilitate the access from workers to skills and TVET institutions, to training programs. So I think emphasizing the role that public employment services can have, I think is also crucial in this toolkit. And I think also another aspect that I saw in the toolkit that is quite positive is the collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, but also collaboration with different ministries. So we as ILO, normally we work together with ministries of labor, which is our main constituent. But of course, we work also together with ministries of education, ministries of energy, ministries of planning, and other relevant institutions at the governments to recognize and prepare for this green transition. Here, I'm talking also about the national level, but of course, it's extremely important that we think about ways to connect what is happening at the national level with the local level or sub-regional level. We see a lot of disconnect oftentimes when we work together with countries in which they have really great policy frameworks at the national level, but they have a lot of difficulty in triggering this down to the local and subnational level. So many times part of our work is also to support in connecting the dots between these different actors that really need to speak among themselves and plan accordingly, so that the policies that are being designed and implemented are coherent. So this is extremely important. Very quickly, also, just to give you a quick example of
So Carolina,
yes,
I'm so sorry. I am going to have to end your time, and I am so sorry to cut you off. We're going to give Azadeh the floor for the equality and energy transitions perspective. We will follow up with Carolina and all the other wonderful discussants. And again, my apologies for the rude interruption. But I do want to allow Azadeh to have the floor for a couple minutes, and then Yossi will close the webinar. My gratitude and thanks to everyone. I will not speak again, but thank you so much.
Thank you, LJ, and the PI colleagues and the SEM Secretariat for convening this important conversation. It's a little challenging to speak last when so many excellent points have been already raised by these fantastic speakers before me, but I'll try to do my best, and please bear with me if I end up echoing some of the points that were already raised. So it's a privilege to engage with the Toolkit ahead of its official time, especially that under the Equality Initiative, we are collaborating with CEM and the Tara Foundation on another toolkit, which is focused on gender equality, inclusivity, and diversity in energy workforce in the Southeast Asian region. Rather than discussing the API toolkit in isolation, I would like to reflect on the two toolkits and these resources and how they complement one another. The data presented in the API toolkit is striking. We see that women's representation is lower than the global average in energy workforce in Southeast Asia. And at the same time, we know that Southeast Asia is home to some of the world's most dynamic and fast-growing clean energy markets. And there's a strong political momentum behind this transition as well. So this is not only a gap, but also a significant untapped potential that can a well-designed ecosystem can really unlock that. So this brings me to the point that this data alignment that was recommended in the API toolkit is like really important. The gender inclusivity toolbox is also similarly emphasizing the need for high quality, sex disaggregated labor market data that is not only on employment, but also on leadership, entrepreneurship, and innovation within the energy sector. And together, the two toolkits can help make these recommendations more practical and also actionable for policymakers across the region. I also really find it valuable that the EPI toolkit is focusing on building the broader ecosystem for the diverse workforce, including the policy frameworks, the TVET pathways, and institutional partnerships. This also, again, creates great synergies with the gender inclusivity toolkit, as our focus is mostly going to be on how participation within this ecosystem can become more equitable and accessible. And these are not really parallel efforts, but go hand in hand with what the EPI is doing. So we also support the development of gender responsive and coordinated policies and programs, not just in the Ministry of Energy, but across relevant ministries such as education, labor, and social welfare. And also, it's important that these partnerships are addressing how women can be attracted to the STEM fields, but also how their ICT skills could be improved and ensure that education and training pathways correspond with the evolving labor market needs. I also just lastly want to say that a point that emerged from our workshop during the ASEAN Energy Gender Week that we co-organized with ACE in Manila about 2 weeks ago was that the discussions highlighted that it's important to also reflect on the persistent challenges besides identifying some concrete practices that make a difference. And in our case, these obstacles were about women's entry, retention, entrepreneurship, and leadership in the energy sector. And another point that was raised was that care infrastructure is a workforce enabler. So with social norms and gender roles that continue shaping care responsibilities, access to care directly impacts the labor market participation. We had one very great example from Dr. Sumarsona from Pertamina, Indonesia. She said that they have these initiatives where they have introduced flexible working arrangements alongside childcare and family support for better balance between professional and care responsibilities. And due to these initiatives, they have seen increase in women's retention in the sector. So as this example also suggests, inclusivity is an enabling condition, and it would be great if the two of our toolkits could work together to make sure that we are cross-referencing each other's work.
Yes, thank you so much, Azadeh, and I would like to thank everyone, LJ, and all the incredible discussions for those rich practical insight. I know it's quite impossible to kind of mention all the good work that you've been doing in 1.5 hours webinar. But I think it's clear from today's conversation that turning policy into practice requires exactly the kind of deep cross-sectoral collaborations, subnational as well as regional engagement that we discussed today. And as you can see on the slide, we invite you to submit your own case studies, successful localized program, and proven regional best practices to be featured in the final toolkit. And I think we would like, again, to emphasize that this toolkit is built by the regions, for the regions, and your on-the-ground expertise is very vital. So yeah, on behalf of the Clean Energy Ministerial Empowering People Initiative and the Tara Climate Foundations, I want to express our deepest gratitude to our speakers, our organizers, and most importantly, to all of you in our global audience and for your active participation and feedback today. And I think together we are building the skills and ecosystems necessary to power a prosperous, just, and sustainable future for Southeast Asia. Once again, thank you, and stay connected on LinkedIn, and please scan the code and have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.